The prohibition against sale of alcoholic beverages and the income tax are two separate constitutional amendments that were passed at more or less the same time, and thrown in with them was women's suffrage. What was the connection between prohibition and the income tax? The reality is that you had to have an income tax if you passed prohibition, because back then, much of the government revenue, all of the government revenue from taxation, everything except for tariff revenue, came from the whiskey tax. And if you outlawed whiskey, you wouldn't get the tax, and you had to replace the revenue. Earlier, when Congress had passed an income tax, the Supreme Court threw it out as unconstitutional. So you needed a constitutional amendment to change that and to permit an income tax to be adopted. Oddly, later when the Prohibition Amendment was facing repeal, the people that put up the money to repeal it were a lot of wealthy Americans, led by DuPont, who did so in the hopes that once Prohibition was gone, whiskey tax revenues would flow again and they could get rid of the income tax. Well, they killed Prohibition, but they didn't get rid of the income tax. And why was women's suffrage part of this whole deal? Because the motivation for prohibition was to stop men from drinking away the paychecks on their way home and to curb abuse of women. And women demanded the vote as a way of achieving that objective. So prohibition and suffrage were both essentially devices to protect women. Oddly, because right now we see prohibition and things like that as being creatures of the right. But back then they were creatures of the left, ultimately to give the women of America the tools to protect themselves. Fascinating history. Thanks for watching.